Hello and welcome to this Learn to Play Chess video. So today I'm just going to try and teach you how to play chess in 30 minutes or less. So if you've never played chess before, this is for beginners out there. Maybe you want to start off the upcoming new year by learning something that you've never done before. And if you want to learn how to play chess, I can show you how here. So in chess, you have a board with 64 squares, alternating colors. And you might wonder, what are these letters and numbers on the sides of the board? Well, that helps you determine what square the pieces are on. And you can use notation to read chess books, which I recommend if you really want to improve your chess. Also, this will help you to follow along. If I mention a square, you'll know where that piece is located. All right, the first thing you want to do if you're learning how to play chess is, of course, how to set up the pieces. You want a white square to be in the bottom right-hand corner every time you set up the board. And that's for both players. So if black is looking at their pieces on their right-hand side in the bottom corner, they'll have a light square. So light on the right or white on the right here, bottom right-hand corner, that'll be a light square. So also when you're setting up a board, the letters and numbers, the letters should go in order from left to right here. A, B, C, D for the white side of the board. And now to set up the pieces, you want the second row to have all pawns. You know, if you're unfamiliar with the names of the pieces, these are the pawns. And then you want the rooks on the corners here. So, you know, castles, some beginners call these castles, but in chess they're known as the rooks. And they will be on the four corners of the chessboard. And beside the rooks, you have the knights, then the bishops, and then this is important, the king and queen. A good way to remember what square the king and the queen, what squares they go on, is queen on her color. So this queen is the white queen on the white square, and then the black queen on the dark square. And that's a good way to remember. Her shoes matches her dress. That's another way to say this. So the white queen's shoes will match her dress. So she's the white queen. She'll be on the white square, or queen on her color. The black queen will be on the dark colors, and the king will be right beside the queen. And some people get confused in these images. They think, well, is this the king here? Or is this the king? Well, the king usually has this cross on top, but not always. That's the easy way to remember it. The king will have this cross. And usually the king is a little bit taller if you're using actual chess pieces. All right, so the next thing you need to learn is how the pieces move. And we'll look at the pawns first. So pawns can move forward one square or two squares on their first move. So here the pawn can go to this square or this square. So I'm going to move this pawn two squares. Now after you decide to move two squares, the pawn can only move one square. So on the first possible move, we can go one or two squares, but after that we can only move forward one square at a time. So pawn moves forward, then it's the opponent's turn. So when you play chess, white always goes first, and then the opponent will respond. And now these pawns are blocking each other. Now the pawns cannot capture one another. The pieces, the pawns capture diagonally like this. So this pawn is covering these two squares. So if white decide, and the same with the opponent's pawn. So if the white player decides to move another pawn, now the pawn can be captured diagonally because that's how pawns move. And now if this pawn moved forward one square, the pawn could capture again, but if instead he decided to go here, now he's protecting his pawn. So if you capture, your opponent can recapture. So that is how the pawns move. They go forward one square or two on their first move, and then after that they can only move one square at a time. So if you move one, well then you can't move two. Then after you've already moved one square instead of two, you can only move one at a time. All right, that covers the pawns. Let's get on to the other pieces here. So if you move this pawn and your opponent does the same, well, the next piece to look at are the bishops. The bishops move diagonally. They can go as far as they want until they hit the edge of the board, or they're capturing a piece or being blocked by a piece. So you could move here. Your opponent could move his bishop, but now you see your bishop is blocked in. So maybe you want to move a pawn, and your opponent does likewise. Now you can move the other bishop. And so now the bishops are attacking one another. And you notice that one bishop will always be on the dark squares, and one will always be on the light squares. So, after this, a bishop could capture, this one could capture, then you go here, the pawns recapture, and the bishops are off the board. All right, next we have, after the pawns and the bishops that move diagonally, we have the rooks. So let's say you want to get your rook moving. Well, the rook moves in a straight line, and it can't move if there is a piece like this knight in the way or this pawn. Now, you could move this pawn and try and bring the rook out into the game, but that's usually not as good of a move, and I'll talk about that later. So, if you just remember that the rooks move in a straight line as long as no pieces are blocking them. And now we'll go to the queen. So if I go back here, the queen is a combination of the rooks and the bishops. So I'll start moving some more pieces here. The bishops we saw move diagonally, and maybe we want to bring these rooks out. So the rooks move in straight lines, left or right, up or down. So now the rook could move here if they wanted to. This rook could move here, or they could go as far as they want until they hit a piece. So now you could capture, and then they could recapture. So the queen was the next piece we want to look at, and the queen moves diagonally. So let's say you go here, and the queen moves diagonally or in a straight line, any direction, as long as it's not blocked by pieces. So once you move this pawn, the queen can move as far as it wants up this diagonal, and then once it's here, it could go to the side as far as it wants. So that's how the queen moves. If our opponent were to play, a move like this, the queen could go here and attack the king. And that's the object of chess. How do you win a game of chess? You want to do what's called a checkmate on the king, where you're attacking the king and the king cannot escape. So here, if our queen moved there attacking the king, this pawn could block. So if we go here, the king is under attack. Now, whenever a king is being attacked by an opponent's piece, it must get out of that attack. If it cannot, then you win. So if you attack the king, this is what's called a check. To win, you have to checkmate. And a checkmate is when you're attacking the king, but it cannot escape. Now, normally when the king is under attack, we have options. Capture the attacker, and there's usually one of three options, but you can't always do all of those three options. The first option would be to capture the attacker, and we can't do that. The other option would be to run, and the king's trapped by its own pieces, and it can't go here because the queen is covering that square, and you're never allowed to move your king to a square that's under attack. So the only other option to stop the attacking queen is to block by moving this pawn here. And now the pawn is threatening to capture that queen. So if we went back and instead, maybe white developed their bishop, and then our opponent kind of ignored the attack that's possible on the king and just pushed another pawn, well, now we can instantly win the game. So this would be a checkmate because the king is under attack. The attacker cannot be captured. The attacker cannot be blocked. And there's no way for this king to run because its own pieces are blocking it in. And this square is already attacked by the queen. And as I mentioned, you're not allowed to move the king to a square where it can be attacked. That would be illegal. All right. The final piece, well, not the final one. We can go back to the beginning here and see how the rest of the pieces move. Okay, the king can move one square at a time. So if these pawns move, well, now the king can move. The king can go in any direction, one square at a time. It can move diagonally. It can move to the left or the right. Forwards or backwards. The king can go one square in any direction. And now the final piece is the, let's see here. The final piece is the knight. The knight is a little bit tricky because the knight goes in an L shape. This knight can move here, here, or here. But it can't move here as well, or excuse me, at the moment because there's a pawn there. The knight is the only piece that can jump over other pieces, but it can't land on a square where its own one of its own pieces is occupying. So if this pawn moved, well, now the knight can go there if it wants. So the knight could go here, the knight could go here, or here. Now, generally, it's good to move your knight here because it's attacking this pawn. And then the opponent could move a knight here to protect the pawn. So now the bishop can move. And that is how the knights move. They could attack a piece by landing on the square where that piece is, and then they capture the piece just like that in that L-shaped move. And our knight moved up there in an L shape. So here we move the pawn forward and it's attacking both of these pieces. So one may retreat, gives us time to attack the other, and then recapture. So in chess, basically, you want to be able to get your pieces off the back rank as quickly as possible. Now, if you leave your pieces back here on the back rank, and when I say pieces, I'm mainly referring to everything except the king. So your rooks, your knights, your bishops, your queen, you want to get them off the back rank and into the action. Because chess is also kind of a race. you want to get your pieces out where they can fight the opponent instead of sitting on the bench back here at home. It's like a sports game. Maybe you have two teams and they want to get their players out on the field. So if one team brings all his players out onto the field and the other player does not do that, it can be a big advantage for the player that is bringing everything out. So let's say the opponent just starts moving this queen around while white just develops everything. The queen's attacking this pawn, so the knight moves to protect the pawn. Now it gives us time, if they move this queen again, let's say they go here, attacking this pawn. Well, now we can attack the queen. The queen would have to move again. And now, let's see, we can just keep developing. And if they think, oh, what can I do with this queen? I'm going to retreat here. Well, the queen is starting to run out of moves, and it's starting to look pretty dangerous. We could have something, or if I go back here. All right. Anyway, I don't want to make it too complicated for you, so let me go back to the beginning here. You want to try and get these pieces developed as quickly as possible, and something that's very important in chess is to control these squares in the center of the board. This is the most important area of the chessboard. Why? Because if you have control of these squares in the center, and then you also control this larger box around the center, the player who controls this area can more easily move his pieces from the center to anywhere in the board more quickly. And it just gives you more power. Think of this as the high ground in the battlefield where you can look down over the entire board from the top of this mountain in the center of the board. All right, let's show you an example of a possible game. So the pawn moves forward. This pawn moves forward as well. And so they are controlling squares in the center because the pawn attacks diagonally. Now, a pawn or a piece that lands on a center square is not controlling the square that they sit on because they're not able to attack the square that they landed on. So now we have this knight developing, attacking the pawn, and the pawn cannot protect itself, so the opponent develops a knight to protect. Then we bring out a bishop, and if you notice, we are covering the square in the center, and we're also aiming at this square next to the king here. So that could be a possible way to threaten our opponent. So the opponent develops, and now we want to do something called castling, which is a move I haven't discussed. The king can only move one square in any direction, but there is one exception called castling. And this is a move where there are no pieces in between the king and a rook. The king is not being attacked, and the two squares in between the king and the rook are not being attacked. And you have not already moved the king or the rook. That gives you the option to do what is called castling. And it's the only time that a king can move two squares like this, and the rook jumps on the other side of the king. It's the only time the rook can jump over its own piece. Now, why would you want to do this move? Well, it's like two moves in one. It gets your king out of the center of the board, because when the king's in the center, it could possibly be attacked from head on, from both sides, three different directions. But once you castle, now the king can only be attacked head on or from this direction. Nothing can come off or come from off the board on the other side over here, unless the piece is right here. But basically, it cuts down the angles of attack from 3 to 2. So the king is safer. It's behind a barricade of pawns and a knight helping protect it. And it gets your rook out of the corner towards the center of the board where it has more options. You have the option now to move the rook here and back up this pawn. So let's continue here. After castling, maybe the knight develops and the opponent is ready to castle. So it's attacking our pawn here. We protect with our knight because the knights move in L shapes. And now, let's see, the opponent maybe goes here and we go here. Now the other bishop can develop and it's attacking ours, but our pawn is protecting it. So if we decide to go ahead and capture, the pawn can recapture, and this has opened up a little gap on the king side here. Now, as I mentioned, you want to get your pieces off the back rank. So you continue developing the bishop. So if, once again, they capture, now the queen can get off the back rank. So maybe the queen goes here, and our queen could do likewise. Now black has the option to castle on the king side of the board or over on the queen side of the board. So either way, when you castle, you have to make sure there are no pieces in between the king and the rook, that you've not moved the king or the rook already, and that the squares that the king will move through or land on are not under attack, and that the king is not under attack himself. So it sounds confusing, but if you play regular chess, after a while, everything will seem much simpler. So we're going to castle to the queen side. The king always moves two squares to the left or the right, depending what side he's castling from, or castling to. So the king will move 2 and the rook will jump on the other side of the king. So now we're going from the opening into the middle game, and a battle will start to occur here. And you have to figure out how to go after your opponent's king. And if you can't do that, then you can start attacking pieces. So I'm going to go here and get ready to double my rooks up. Maybe the opponent sees that coming and gets ready to try and stop me. So now I have these rooks working together, lining up on my opponent here. Now, let's say the opponent starts fighting here in the center and pushes a pawn, and I go ahead and capture. They capture. And then, let's see. Maybe we go here, and the opponent, decides to help protect this pawn. Well, now I can capture. So now this is where things get kind of tricky. If I don't know, move here, and my opponent does not see the threat that is coming, maybe instead my opponent decides to attack my queen. I retreat, and then they don't know what to do here, and they just move a pawn. Well, now we have this attack. We capture, they capture, and then we capture, and their king is in check. And when the king is in check, it must move. And once the king moves, if we look at the position here, white is ahead in material. And you see a +5 here, if you can read that at the bottom of the board. That tells you how many pawns you're ahead, the equivalent of pawns, because we're ahead by a rook here, and that rook is worth 5 pawns. And if you can't go after the king and deliver an immediate checkmate, well then the next best thing is to try and capture pieces and pawns and use those extra pieces of material to your advantage in the end of the game. So if we go back here, I'm going to give you the approximate value of the pieces here. So let's clear the board, and I'll tell you what these pieces are worth. A bishop is the equivalent of 3 pawns. A knight is the equivalent of 3 pawns as well. So now a rook is more valuable than a bishop. It is worth 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pawns. And the queen is the most valuable piece. It is worth the equivalent of 9 pawns. So 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So we see how the queen is much more valuable, and you don't want to give up your queen for a less valuable piece. Now the king doesn't really have a value, because if you lose the king, then the game's over. So let me start this again. Now you might wonder, well, okay, what if I trade a rook for a knight and a bishop? Well, these would be worth 3 pawns apiece. So a knight and a bishop would be worth a total of 6 pawns, and this is only worth 5. So then maybe a rook and a pawn might be a closer to even trade here. Also, maybe you trade a queen for 2 bishops and a knight, and that's about even, because each one of these smaller or less powerful pieces are worth 3 pawns. So we have a total of 9 pawns worth of material here, because each one of these is equal to 3 pawns. So the queen is worth a bishop, bishop and knight, or 2 knights and a bishop, or these 9 pawns down here. So either way, the queen is worth all these pawns or these 3 pieces. Or if you want to make it a little more tricky, the queen could be worth, let's see here. One queen could be worth a rook that's worth 5 pawns, a knight that's worth 3, so that's a total of 8, and then a pawn is worth 9. So you could trade a queen for these pieces and it would be equal. So in chess, you want to try and go after the king. You want to make even trades with material. You don't want to give up too much material. So anyway, if I go back to setting up the board here, just remember, in chess, if you want to play quickly, you can start playing immediately. Just remember how the pawns move. They go forward 1 square or 2 on their first move, and then after that they go forward 1 square at a time. The pawns capture diagonally like this. So pawns capture diagonally but move forward. Then you have knights that move in the L shape. Now we're attacking this pawn, so maybe they protect by moving here. Then we can capture, and now the queen can capture, because the queen moves any direction as far as it wants until it hits a piece or is blocked by its own piece. And remember, in chess, you capture by landing on the square of the piece that you're capturing. All right, so now let's say you want to move a bishop. So our opponent goes here. We move a bishop here. And now our opponent decides to move a knight. And we attack the knight. They attack our bishop. We capture. And now we go here and we're threatening an attack. And if our opponent doesn't see that, maybe they want to attack our queen with a pawn, we can deliver a mate. So that's how you win a game of chess. You attack the king. The king cannot capture the queen because it's backed up by a bishop that's also attacking the square the queen's on, and it's illegal to move the king to a square under attack. So to win, you must attack your opponent's king, and if they can't capture the attacker, block the attacker, or run, that's a checkmate. So I hope this helped you, especially for you beginners out there. Go ahead and play some chess. Find a friend to play online, and I hope you enjoy. Feel free to leave any comments, like and subscribe to support this channel if you haven't already. Thank you for watching and have a super chess day.